but depression is a very complex issue. And in case you're feeling proud because you don't battle with depression, don't, because depression doesn't discriminate. In other words, if you don't have it, that doesn't make you more spiritual than someone that does. It can hit anybody at any time. It doesn't discriminate. And there's also no one size fits all. When we talk about this, I just want to acknowledge it's a very complex issue. I've said it every week. I am not an expert at all. I sought a lot of expert advice, and I've read and researched. And according to the experts I'm talking to, and according to all the research that I've done, there are essentially 4 root causes of depression that I want to acknowledge today. The first is what we would say is like a biological cause. If you're battling with depression right now, you may not have done anything wrong whatsoever in your life. You might actually have a chemical imbalance in your body or in your brain that's causing you to feel a certain way. You might have chronic pain that's certainly not your fault, that's just leading you into a state of darkness. You might have a nutritional deficit. You might have hormonal changes. You have a baby and you come out of it and you feel postpartum crazy. The reason is because you're postpartum crazy. Your hormones aren't functioning like normal and you have unusual feelings. You might not be sleeping enough. You might not be exercising enough or getting enough sunlight. There are biological causes to depression. There's also what we would say would be relational causes. In other words, you might be having a really big problem with one of your kids, or they have a kind of a life-threatening issue and that's weighing on you, or your marriage is falling apart, or you've got issues with people that you love, or you're going through a divorce, or you've been rejected, or you went through a global pandemic and had isolation for 18 months and didn't have real fellowship whatsoever, and you wonder why you're feeling dark. You might have some biological reasons, some relational reasons, or you might have circumstantial causes at the root cause of your depression. You might have lost somebody close to you, and you're dealing with the feelings of darkness, and you just wish you could talk to them one more time, or you might have been through some type of trauma, or financially you did everything you could to hold it together and you couldn't keep up and you filed bankruptcy. Or it could even be something that appears to be good, like you looked forward to retirement and then you retired and you're now I'm gonna have fun. You're who am I now? What's my purpose now? Or in my age group, there's a lot of people that are sending their kids out and now they have no more children at home and they're feeling the sadness and depression of being an empty nester. We cried on the first 4 kids we sent out. We got 2 more. Now we're kind of like, what are you guys doing here? We did cry, but we'll be sad. But we might actually have a little bit of party. I don't know for sure, but no, just kidding. I love all of them a lot, and there's 2 of them still in my house. And it could be that it's biological, relational, circumstantial, or you might have depression from real spiritual attacks. And we have to remember that we do not battle against flesh and blood, but we have very real spiritual battles against the forces of darkness that want to steal, kill, and destroy everything that matters to God, and nothing matters to God more than you do. There are different root causes. Depression doesn't discriminate, and there's no one size fit all. And I'm obviously not a doctor or a licensed counselor. I am a pastor. And so what I want to do today is I want to try to talk to you from a very spiritual perspective, acknowledging that this is a complex issue, and you'll certainly want to get holistic help, but I want to talk to you from a spiritual perspective today. And I want to show you in the Old Testament a very depressed man of God. And I want you to understand, this was a prophet. And so this was a guy that spoke on behalf of God, and he represented God, and he told people what God told him to say. And yet this man of God, this person of deep and committed faith, was also in a very deep and dark and desperate place. We're going to look at the prophet Jeremiah in Lamentations chapter 3, and I want to give you a little bit of context to understand his depression. You may remember Solomon's temple, which was one of the greatest tributes to God in the history of mankind. It stood for 400 years or so before it was tragically destroyed by the Babylonians in 587 BC. Well, Jeremiah saw the destruction. He would have witnessed his loved ones being murdered, his close friends being taken captive. He would have watched perhaps family members being deported away as his city is homeland. The house of God is completely destroyed, and he saw it and he was depressed. The only thing I can relate to is when I was a young pastor at First Methodist Church downtown, when I was at seminary, the day that the Murrow building was bombed. And when I came back, I had special access on that day to get in, and they turned our lobby of the church into a morgue, and I was 23 or 4 years of age, and they said, whatever you do, don't look in that lobby. Well, being dumb, I looked in the lobby, and what I saw was a sight that it's horrific. Bodies. And he saw this firsthand. He saw loved ones. And he was depressed. Just like some of you right now. Didn't know where to turn. And I want you to watch the descriptions of a man of God who found himself for a moment without hope. Look at the descriptive metaphors. If you've never battled with depression, this is an incredibly accurate description of what someone would feel. He says this, he says, I'm the man who's seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. He's driven me away and made me, this is what he says, walk in darkness rather than light. He's besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and hardship. He's made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. He's walled me in so I cannot escape. He's weighed me down with chains. Even when I cry out for help, he shuts out my prayer. I've been deprived of peace. I've forgotten what prosperity is. So I say, my splendor is gone. All that I've hoped for from the Lord. Listen to his dark cry. He says, I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. I remember them well. My soul is downcast within me. The prophet of God, the man of God, is broken. He momentarily has no hope. Two things to remember when you're battling depression. Two things to remember. The first thing that I want to try to help you remember right now is this, that your emotions are actually valid. A lot of times in a church culture, people say, it doesn't matter what your feelings are, don't believe your feelings, and you shouldn't pay any attention to your feelings. And I want to show you that your emotions are valid. And the second truth I want you to understand is that your situation feels hopeless. If you're depressed right now, you don't know what to do, you don't know where to turn, you don't know how to get out. You may have tried to pray and you've tried to read your Bible and you tried to believe and you did it for so long and now you have no hope whatsoever. And what I just told you on those truths are completely true, but they're incomplete. They're true, but they're incomplete. And what I want to do is I want to show you the complete truths because so many people get stuck on what is true, but is what is also incomplete. So let's look at them again. First of all, I want you to know that your emotions are valid, but they are not permanent. They are valid, but they are not permanent. And the second thing I want you to remember is that your situation feels hopeless, but with God, there is always hope. with the presence of our God, even when you don't feel it, even when you don't see it, even when everything feels hopeless with our God, there always is hope. And I want to unpack these truths and dive deep into them and pray that a good word will bring you hope. When you hurt, when you don't know where to turn, when you feel like you've done it all and you can't get out, I want to tell you that your emotions, they're valid. They're valid, they're real, and they're actually an important part of your healing. An expert would tell you that one of the ways to heal and to actually change your emotions is to start by acknowledging your emotions and literally naming your emotions. If you feel hopeless right now, what I want you to do is just say or think, I feel hopeless. Those of you online, you could even type it in the comment section if you want. What do you feel? Name what you feel. You might say, I feel angry. I feel hurt. I feel pissed off at the world. I feel betrayed. If you're depressed, you might say, I feel empty right now. Or I feel numb. You name your feelings. You might say, I feel afraid. Speaking of being afraid, how many of you are afraid of spiders? Raise your hands. Afraid of spiders? Afraid of spiders? I want to show you a study that was done that was not just with house spiders, but this one was actually done with tarantulas. How weird is that? 3 people in the front row just ran out the building. If you're listening right now, you don't see what we're seeing, but there is full-blown, nasty, and hairy tarantula on my stage. I didn't want to get close to it. I'm going to tell you about the study, and what they did is they took some people who were afraid of spiders, and they exposed them to a tarantula in a cage, and then they broke them into 4 groups. Now, would you mind taking that tarantula away? Now I can concentrate again. Now what they did, let me say it again in case you missed it, is they took people who were afraid of spiders, put a tarantula in a cage, and exposed them to the tarantula in the cage. They broke them into 4 groups, and they gave them 4 different assignments. The first group, they said, I want you to label what you're feeling. In other words, I feel afraid of hairy spiders. Label what you're feeling. The second group, they said, make observations. Just a general, emotionless, feeling less observation like that tarantula's in a cage. That tarantula is big. To the third group, they said, just say something irrelevant. Just say something irrelevant like, it's a Tuesday, or it looks like it might rain. To the fourth group, they said, don't say anything at all. And they gave them 4 different assignments. Label what you're feeling, make observations, say something irrelevant, and don't say anything at all. And they took the people that were afraid of spiders, and they brought them back a week later, and they exposed them again to a tarantula, this time not in a cage, and they measured their physiological responses. Did they sweat? Did their heart rate beat? Did they pee in their pants? What did they do? And what they discovered out of the 4 groups, by far, the one who labeled their feelings a week previously did exceptionally better. They were less nervous. Many of them were actually even able to touch the tarantula. And what they learned from that and other studies, and they will teach you that naming your emotions opens the door to changing your emotions. Your emotions are actually valid. Name your emotions. It's not something like spiritual to pretend like they're not there. They're there. God gave you emotions. They're valid, but they're not permanent. When you recognize they're not permanent and you identify them, I feel alone, I feel desperate, I feel hopeless. When you name it, that opens the door to God being able to change it. And because our emotions are temporary, very, very important, we're not gonna make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. When you are feeling down, we're not gonna make permanent decisions based on that. Not only are we not gonna make permanent decisions, but don't make permanent conclusions. When you feel, well, all men are this, well, all people are that, well, all churches are that, well, you can't. No. We're not going to make permanent decisions or permanent conclusions based on temporary emotions. When you feel afraid, when you feel threatened, you might feel like quitting on your marriage. You might feel like quitting on God. You might feel like running out the door and shutting everybody out and getting a big bottle of Jack Daniels and drinking yourself silly. In the darkest times, you may feel like life is not worth it. And your spiritual enemy, who wants to steal, kill, and destroy, may whisper to you, you'd be better off if you weren't here. And in the moment, that may feel true. But I want you to know that is never, ever, ever, under any circumstances true. Because God knew what he was doing when he made you. He knew you before you were formed in your mother's womb. And he put you here on earth to know him and gave you good works in advance to do. And so we're not going to make permanent decisions or permanent conclusions based on temporary emotions. Your emotions, they're valid. They're real. God gave them to you. We're going to feel them, but not be ruled by them. Not ruled by them. Your emotions, they're valid, but they're not permanent. And the second thing I want to show you today is that your situation may feel hopeless, but with God, there is always hope. With God, there is always, always hope. You may not feel it, you may not believe it, but I want to bring a good word to you today. And I'm praying the good word will bring you hope. God always can give you hope. In fact, I want to show you in our text today in Lamentations chapter 3. So in verse 20, and then I'll read 21. In verse 20, do you remember what Jeremiah said in verse 20? He said, my soul is downcast. My soul is downcast. And then verse 21, he turns to God and he says, yet this I call to mind. I feel hopeless. I feel depressed. I'm walking in darkness. I have no hope whatsoever. Yet this I call to mind. And because I call this to mind, therefore I have hope. In the middle of his darkest moment, he calls to mind the goodness, the character, the nature of God. And he talks about it, and it's beautiful the way he talks about it. Verse 22, he says, because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed. For his compassions never fail. They're new every morning. And in the middle of his darkness, he declares, God, great is your faithfulness. I call this to mind. Because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed. Because of his love. The word love in the Hebrew text is the plural form of the word hesed, which is a very powerful word that's very difficult to translate. It's in the Bible 248 times, and it's packed with meaning. Many Hebrew words, they're more like a sentence or a thought or almost like a mini story. It's very hard to translate some of them into English because they're so rich and deep with meaning. And the word hesed, translators try to say like loving kindness or translate as mercy or loyalty or such. But this word is impossible to describe apart from the fullness of God's character. Two definitions I like. Translators said it this way. Hesed actually means the unbreakable devotion to God's promises. It's a covenantal commitment to God's character. That's what it is. Because of his love, we're not consumed. And his compassions never fail. The word compassions is translated from the Hebrew word rahama, which is the very same root word which actually means a mother's womb. I love this. What happens in a womb? Well, the womb is a safe place. The womb is the sanctuary where life begins. In the womb, the life is nourished and is strengthened, and it's protected, and it's in this womb that the compassions never fail. They're new every morning. The grace of God is new every morning. His presence is new every morning. He gives you enough every morning. He gives you the daily bread. He gives you daily grace. He gives you daily compassion. He gives you daily goodness. It's his daily presence. With him, there's always hope. There's always hope. So what do when the whole world feels dark? Well, acknowledge it. Like, call it what it is. I feel depressed. I feel hopeless. And then just also acknowledge, I need help. This is a safe place to say that you need help. And I want to say it again. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of wisdom. I need help. And then get help. What might you do to get help? Well, you might talk to a counselor. That's wise. You might go to a doctor who might prescribe helpful medicine. That's wise, and that is not unspiritual. You might change your diet. That's wise and spiritual. Works with the way God designed your body. You might start to exercise, or you might journal, or you might get in a life group. Oh my gosh, I don't know how people deal with the forces of darkness without people of light standing by them to encourage them, pray for them, and cheer them on. We need community, and we need each other, and we are better together, iron sharpening iron, to help us become the people of God, called to walk in his ways and share his light and his love. You might pray, and you might pause, and you might praise. I call this to mind. I call this to mind. And when you do these different things, do you know what happens? Let me tell you what happens. You start to change your posture. When you're depressed, if you're talking to a depressed person, question, are their shoulders up or are their shoulders down? They're down. Is their voice loud with confidence or quiet in darkness? Are they smiling or are they frowning? They're frowning. Their posture's down. Now, I can't prove this, but I can almost guarantee you. When Jeremiah said, I'm in darkness, his posture's down. I've lost all hope, his posture's down. And then he said, yet I call this to mind. He changed his posture. Yet I call, here's what I want you to know. Your posture, it reflects your mood, but your posture can also